London. But when the ship's owners proved reluctant to send their ships back, the men decided they had no other choice but to destroy the tea. Why did the destroyers want to prevent the tea from landing in Boston? The easiest answer is that Parliament had imposed a tax on tea. Many people thought this tax was reasonable, but a dissident faction of Bostonians, the majority of the townspeople in fact, believed that Parliament had no right to raise revenue from American colonists without the colonists' consent. The Bostonians worried that more taxes were on the way. They knew that the revenue from the taxes paid the salaries of the civil officials that the British government had appointed to enforce the imposition of taxes. To the Bostonians and other dissidents throughout the colonies, this was a blatant example of tyranny. Even worse, this tea was to be sold by the preferred agents of a monopoly company, the British East India Company. Parliament had imposed this new arrangement under the Tea Act, which now threatened American merchants by cutting them out of the tea trade. If Parliament could sell tea to America this way and earn revenue from the sales, then the British government could start creating new monopolies on the sale of other products. Exorbitant prices, mammoth monopolies, and crushing taxes might leave Americans with nothing. Dissidents were frightened, not just because of what they saw happening in Boston, but because of what they had seen happening throughout the world. Tyranny and liberty were locked in a constant struggle, and the dissident Bostonians knew which side they supported. The story of the Boston Tea Party was not just a local story, but a global story. The British East India Company, which was gaining territorial control over more and more South Asians, made much of its profit selling tea, a product grown by East Asians. When Europeans and Americans drank tea, they mixed it with sugar, farmed by enslaved Africans in the Caribbean. When the Bostonians dumped this tea in the harbor to protest the actions of the East India Company and the British Parliament, they dressed as Native Americans. These were just some of the historical currents swirling around the Boston Tea Party. The Boston Tea Party had revolutionary significance. It set the stage for an American rebellion and the war that followed. The Tea Party was an expression of political ideology about taxes, rights, and authority. Just as important, it was a window onto American culture and society of the time. Americans' consumer habits, including the colonists' love of tea, played a role in the way the resistance unfolded. Prevailing views of American Indians in colonial society help us to understand the disguises that the destroyers wore. Boston's colonial legacy of riotous parades, angry protest, and political organization provided the ingredients that made the Tea Party possible. These elements offer a fuller picture of why the Tea Party happened. The destruction of the tea was a quintessential rejection of authority that became a cherished American tradition. The Tea Party involved a relatively broad segment of the population, even though this was an era when only the elite were thought fit to rule and make decisions. Because of this, the destruction set a world standard for future democratic protest. From the British perspective, the Boston Tea Party was the culmination of a decade's worth of flawed imperial policy, and the event certainly played a part in its imperial legacy. To Americans, the Tea Party became an emblem of their faith that a determined and organized group can accomplish momentous political change, culminating in independence. The participants were men who showed their willingness to defy the law in defense of their rights. To this day, journalists, pundits, and politicians frequently cite the Tea Party as the first and most famous example of Americans' heritage of civil disobedience, their penchant for secret conspiracies, and their aversion to foreign trade restrictions, excessive taxation, or government overreach. By reading the tea leaves at the bottom of Boston Harbor, we can see the American character itself taking shape. The day after the Tea Party, the attorney and future President John Adams called it the most magnificent movement of all. He went on, "There is a dignity, a majesty, a sublimity in this last effort of the Patriots that I greatly admire." Not everyone agreed. Some found the story of the Tea Party to be inspiring and democratic, but others called it riotous, disorderly, and disturbing. They saw a pack of rebels who had disobeyed the law, destroyed private property, and threatened anyone who stood in their way. 18th-century Boston was a town where crowd action was not uncommon. From time to time, townspeople pulled down opponents' houses, brawled with soldiers, threw bricks at officials, tarred and feathered